I greatly appreciate the invitation. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Can you, whoever is taking care of the technical side, there we go. I want to be able to pick up my my slides. So great being with everybody today. I'm going to go and pick up my, I have got about 30 minutes in order to provide a presentation, which I hope will be useful to you. Let me pick up those now. Just give me a moment here to let's see. Can everybody, hopefully everybody can see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've got two pictures up. I've got a picture of me, which I don't need to see, and my PowerPoint slide. So let me go and see how I can eliminate my particular picture right here. Let's go back. Just a moment, please, here, trying to. The problem is I have a picture of me and I've got my slides, but I can't see my slides that are in the back. So I apologize for that. Let me just figure out how in the world to get out of that situation. Let me try this here.
So you can move your slides now, no worries.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, excellent. So let's talk about what I'm going to be working with you today. I wanted to deal with a topic that hopefully in many different disciplines, this is not designated for a specific area such as marketing or finance or accounting or management, something along that particular line, but basic for anybody who is doing research and is interested in improving their productivity. And also, I'm assuming that we have a number of folks in doctoral programs or master programs or that are either in the academic world or want to enter that particular world after they complete their particular degrees. So what can we do to increase our productivity and journal acceptances? So I've broken this down into two pieces. The first piece that we see over here is looking at research productivity. And I'm going to give you what I call a baker's dozen. If you're not familiar with what that is, we know everybody knows what a dozen is. A baker's dozen is going to be 13 different items. And I'm going to go through each one of these very briefly. Not every one of these items is going to apply to every person, but hopefully a large number of these can be of benefit to you. So let's start out by taking a look at what are we talking about when we're dealing with productivity. And I am dealing with personal productivity here. And as you can see over here, if you're going to be productive and success as a researcher, this isn't something that doesn't happen by accident. It happens by commitment, by focusing on excellence, by intelligent planning, and then having very focused effort. And so each one of these slides, I'm going to provide an idea, a suggestion that's largely come from my own experience over the years, and then make a brief comment about each one of those. And each one of these should only take a little over a minute in order to discuss. So the first over here is part of a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that basically says, "Hitch your wagon to a star." Now, what do I mean by that? If you are a relatively new academic or going into academics, and one of the key things that all academics typically do is going to be research, teaching, and service. All of those are important elements. Depending on the nature of the institution that you're part of, one could be more important than another. You could have many institutions are primarily research institutions where faculty members will do relatively little amount of teaching. On the other hand, you've got teaching universities that the emphasis on the teaching and relatively little on research. But if you are interested in becoming successful in research, one way to do that is the following. Think for a moment if you were in a master's or doctoral program, or you've been in academics for a short while, probably throughout your program, you didn't receive much guidance on how to be successful as an academic. Perhaps you were a teaching assistant or something along that particular line. But when it came to research, you certainly understood research methods and made presentations, etc. But really often was not much emphasis on how you can really get your research published. And one of the first things to do would be to try to hitch your wagon to a star. What do I mean by that? Well, that's trying to develop a relationship with someone who is already successful. My primary field is in finance. I remember when I was finishing my first doctorate, I left the University of Maryland, went to Georgetown University as administrator and also as a professor. I wanted to be able to have my work published in the top journals. Well, at that time, nobody knew who I was. That may also relate to you when it comes to the research side. Man, I've published very, very little or nothing at all. How do you try to reach out and be successful in journal publishing, which is very, very difficult? Well, one of the first things you can do if you don't have that experience yourself, someone who's gone through that process, is try to find someone. It could be, for example, like in my case, my doctoral advisor, and we worked together for 15, 20 years doing research. He was a very, very well-known individual, so I tried to hitch my wagon to a star. And of course, if you do that, just as Professor Kotler was saying about Lady Gaga, if she happens to endorse one of your products, that could result in additional sales. If you're unable to hitch your wagon to a star, then you can try to find a mentor. And a mentor, hopefully you've developed that kind of relationship, for example, in a doctoral program that you've been part of, or if you're at a university, finding someone who is senior to you to work with that's got more knowledge and experience. And what that mentor does, that mentor is able to see things in yourself that perhaps you won't even see, but will bring out the best in you and simply provide guidance that's going to take place. In many other trades, you go through an apprenticeship. If you're becoming an electrician or a plumber or what have you, you go through an apprenticeship. The same thing can take place with a mentor. That mentor is providing that guidance, but it needs to be a two-way street. You need to provide something that's going to be beneficial to the mentor, and the mentor in turn will provide something that's beneficial to you. Now, I remember my first publications came out in the very, very top journals, not because of me, people knowing who I was, which no one did at that particular time, but simply because my mentor was well known, and that had an impact. Number three, if you have done a dissertation, I'm assuming many of you are doctoral students in a PhD type of program, your dissertation should serve as a springboard. My general belief is that if you're on a tenure track at a university, that dissertation should take you at least half the way towards the number of types of publications that you would need in order to meet your tenure requirements when it comes to research productivity. So all the time, effort, and energy that you put into your dissertation, just don't leave it there. Use that as a basis in working perhaps with your dissertation advisor, a mentor, or you've hitched your wagon to a star, to have those as some of your initial publications that would occur. In other words, what you're trying to do, which is very important in finance and in business, is to get a return on your investment. And that return is going to be all that hard work that you did. You certainly did get a return of being able to get your doctorate, but this will help lead you to the situation of obtaining tenure by using that particular dissertation to develop one or more papers. I recall I was able to get 5 totally separate papers from my doctoral dissertation, 3 of which appeared in the top journals in finance and accounting at that particular time. So it can really be a springboard. Number 4, being successful and being productive doesn't happen by chance. It requires planning, prioritizing where you put your efforts, organizing your team, and I'll talk more about that together, your team of individuals with whom you're going to collaborate in order to write. In general business publications today, relatively few of those, when you take a look at the top journals, for example, that are sole authored. It generally will take place with a team, and I'll discuss that a little bit later, but you need to plan, where do you want to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and then prioritize your efforts and then work that particular plan. In other words, you want to look into the future and you want to try to achieve that future. And you do that by your planning and then working that plan so you can make the future into reality and into success. You can see the quote from Alan Lincoln. Planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. Now, here's something that I haven't seen elsewhere about how to work. And I recommend working in arcs. These are arcs that you can see over here in the picture. Well, what in the heck does that mean when it comes to productivity? Well, the arcs are basically the following. When you think about the work that you did on your dissertation, it took you perhaps several years to go through that particular process and defend. And of course, many years before that, gaining the understanding to work on a particular type of topic. So working in arcs basically means identifying some area that you can work in and work on that for a number of years. Let me give you a quick example going back to my own situation. One of the things when I got my first doctorate was I developed some special skills in survey research. Now, survey research is not particularly popular in finance, certainly at that time. It was much more popular in areas such as marketing and in management, but much less so in the area of finance. And so as a consequence, I developed that particular skill, and I wanted to be able to do that kind of work. And you can apply survey research to any number of different types of areas. It's not limited. I decided initially to do work in dividend policy. And I worked in survey research, still do today after more than 4 decades. And I still do work in dividend policy because it takes you a long time to gain that ability that you understand the literature, you understand what the gaps are. So if you are able to master a particular area, it can be a methodology, it can be a particular topic area, like I was talking about in dividend policy, you can basically leverage that for many years. And then, for example, if you pick a particular hot topic, it's liable to die down after a while. You can then start another one and build another arc for 3, 4, 5 years to gain that particular expertise. For example, in the area of survey research, when Oxford University Press wanted to have a book in finance on survey methodology, they came to me because of my work that I'd done in the past to ask me to write that particular book, which I did, called Survey Research Methodology in Finance, Bridging the Gap Between Theory and Practice. Point number 6, establishing a reputation in an area. Many people jump from area to area in order to do their research instead of focusing on a very limited number. I suggest focusing on a particular topic area, methodology, or issue, build that into an arc, publish in that area, so you gain a reputation for the work in that particular area that has taken place. Why is that important? Well, it's important because when you take a look at your reputation, I'll use a word that's used very frequently In the marketing side, your reputation is your brand. So if you become well known as a researcher, a respected researcher in survey methodology or dividend policy or whatever the topic area may be, that's an exceptionally valuable asset that can help you as you move throughout your career. As I mentioned, success and high levels of productivity, those are items that just don't occur by happenstance. You have to plan. And planning means setting the goals. So let's talk just a very, very brief moment about the goals. And if you set goals, which everybody should do, you want to have those particular goals that are going to be called SMART goals. You'll see over on the left. You want them to be specific. You want them to be measurable. You want them to be achievable. You want them to be realistic, and you want them to be timely. So you could set, for example, a goal over the next 5 years. I plan to publish X number of articles in A-level journals, and then you can use whatever sources for the ratings that may be used in your particular school. For example, the CABS type of ratings that would exist. And you can measure what identify those specific journals, what they are. It's easy to measure. People know if you're in finance, the top journals are things like the Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial Economics, Review of Finance, and the like. But you want those goals to be challenging, but they need to be realistic. You say, I'm going to publish in the next 5 years, 10 A-level journals, articles in A-level journals. That's very, very unrealistic. There are a few people in the world that are able to do that, given the very, very low acceptance rates that take place of those journals. So when you take a look at the importance of goals, these are motivating factors, as we'll see. So what you want to focus is, where do you want to be? As you try to get there, you're going to run into obstacles. You want to focus your attention not on the obstacles. You want to climb over them, under, or around them. You want to focus on your goals. Alan Lakin, who wrote a very famous time management book many years ago, talked about focusing on A's, not C's. A's are those types of areas that have priority, the things you want to achieve, your particular goals, not with the C's. The C's are not things that are particularly important, or more mundane types of areas. Number 8, in this situation of moving forward, you're going to have distractions. You're going to have family, you're going to have friends, you're going to have a spouse, significant others, kids, people at your university, students, etc. All of those will want part of your time. Well, of course, you're going to need to devote time appropriately, but you want to be able to focus on your goals, on your research goals. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to achieve them. And so the key here is, nice phrase, starve your distractions, feed your focus. So you don't want to be distracted. You want to have like a raincoat on. So if it's raining, those distractions, they will bounce off, and focus on where you want to get to in your walk, not the things that are getting in your way. Now, one of the things that happens to almost all of us is a tendency to procrastinate. Well, that tendency creates some great problems. For example, if you procrastinate on a particular goal, trying to publish in a certain type of area over a certain period of time, and you procrastinate, you're very likely to feel guilty if you're waiting for a review and you're going to need an article for your annual performance evaluation. You don't have that. You're liable to experience panic. Making excuses to those that are evaluating are not going to be particularly useful. So by all means, try to avoid procrastination. I love the comment here that's shown by Charles Dickens. My advice is, never do tomorrow what you can do today. Procrastination is a thief of time. So each day you want to focus on your A's if you're looking at productivity and being successful as a researcher, focusing on the A's in your overall goals, not on the C's, which often are simply distractions. Number 9 is staying motivated. Often people are motivated in a very short period of time, but as time progresses, they run into the difficulty of staying motivated. And that's the importance, as we see over here, of having the goals. Goals provide direction. Also, we have a choice. You've heard a glass, someone could look at a glass and say, oh, it's half full or it's half empty. Well, it's both of those. But the point is, the situation, if you take a positive attitude as opposed to a negative attitude, that will help you along the way to achieve your success, have high levels of performance. But nobody today is an effective researcher does it on their own. I'll talk more about this in just a moment. You need support, and that can come from colleagues, can come with a research team. It could come, of course, from family and others, but these are some elements that are critical in order to stay motivated, in order to achieve your goals. Comment by the late Steve Jobs. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. And that statement is very, very true. The key thing, in my view, of being successful as a researcher, or almost in anything in life, is passion. If you're not passionate about what you do, if you're not passionate about your research, you'll be less motivated, you'll tend to procrastinate, you'll tend not to succeed and not to meet your goals. So find what you love to do. If it's a particular research topic, go there, and what you will find that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I mentioned the importance that almost nobody in the research area today does things by themselves. So you need to develop a network of others that are going to work with you, and you're going to need to collaborate. Now, what this basically says, you need to put together a research team. And when you're putting together that research team, what you're doing is getting many minds working together in addition to your own. And that is the true example of synergy. And by synergy, that means the sum is greater than the individual parts. And when you put together that team, you want to make sure that you have a complementary type of team that has individuals that have different skill sets. Just think about a baseball team or a basketball team or soccer, etc. Let's take baseball just for a moment. You could have a team and you have the best pitchers in the league, but you don't have terrible hitters, and first, second, third base and outfielders are not particularly good. You're not going to have a winning team. You've got to put together people that have those different skill sets that are going to be complementary, to be synergistic in order to increase the potential of success. And number 12, we have one more to go after this, is on the nature of your work. You want to make your contacts and you want to get feedback on what you are doing. We tend to become very narrow focused when we look at our work, and we may write a particular sentence or a paragraph or a page. Someone can look at that and be able to see that it may not be particularly as clear as we thought it happened to be. So seek that feedback. Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, we all need people to give us feedback. That's how we improve. And that feedback needs to be honest, not necessarily being concerned with, am I going to hurt somebody's feelings? That the feedback should always intended to be positive, not detrimental or negative. And then the last comment I would say that's important is to focus on your strengths. What do you really do well? Let's say you have a team of 3 people, a research team that's writing articles. You want, as I said, you want to be able to have each individual have their own skill sets. What are you really good at? So what you want to do is you want to focus on your strongest skills, and those weaker areas, you want to outsource them. In other words, other members in the team can pick up the slack on your weaknesses, and you can pick up the slack with some of their weaknesses. In other words, you can basically do is, if you've done a management course before or in a marketing course, etc., do a SWOT analysis, strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats to identify your strengths and your weaknesses, but focus on your strengths, not on your weaknesses. Now, the last thing I'm going to do in the remaining few minutes that I have is to take a look at increasing journal acceptances. I'm using examples since it's my primary discipline of finance. My comments can relate to any field that would take place. I'm just using the examples that we have over here, finance journals. These are some of the top finance journals that you would have in the world. So if you wanted to get into the Journal of Finance or Journal of Financial Economics or Review of Financial Studies or the JFQA, Journal of Financial Quantitative Analysis, all of these are A+ or premier types of journals. These are exceptionally difficult. You're looking at acceptance rates somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% or below, and you are competing against everybody in the world, right, in finance who wants to get into that limited number of top journals. The typical finance faculty member in their entire career, we're looking at on average, right, will never publish in a top finance journal, the top 3, 4, or 5 finance journals. It's that difficult to get in. Trying to do that on your own, it's not impossible, but it's definitely very, very difficult. So what can we do? If you don't want to shoot at that particular level, of course, you could look at B level or C level journals, depending upon what's going to be appropriate, given your background, your interests, your goals, and of course, what the criteria are at your particular institution for merit evaluations or for potentially tenure. So let's go through these pretty quickly. I have 10 of these. Before doing a paper sending it to a journal, I suggest that you present it at one or more either professional meetings or at another university, or if your own university, for example, has a monthly presentation of a working paper, present there, get that feedback that I talked about earlier from your colleagues. That can help polish the paper and help improve its chances at any journal that would occur. When you're determining where you want that journal, where that article to go, it is critical that you devote quite a bit of time to determining what is your target journal. Now, you may want to say, I only want to publish in the top journals. Well, that would be great. And if you could potentially do that, that would be a wonderful thing to occur if that happened to be your goals. However, as I've mentioned, the probability that you're going to get into those is exceptionally small unless you meet certain criteria, which I'll talk about in just a few moments. So very important to target that journal. So what you will do is you go on the website of that particular journal and take a look at their guidelines for authors and see what their emphasis is. Does your particular article fit? If they don't do systematic literature reviews, sending a systematic literature review to that journal almost certainly is going to result in being desk rejected by the editor. You won't even be sent out. So you have to meet what the goals of that particular journal is going to be. And we'll talk about following after you select a journal and you've decided upon one, you want to follow the guidelines that are specified. Every journal will have their own set of guidelines. They may have different references, different page lengths, etc., different word counts that would occur, how they want you to do tables and figures. You want to very carefully follow those guidelines because what that can, sometimes they will say, they being the editors, would be if you don't find the guidelines, we can reject it and not even go any further. So why waste the time of trying to send to the journal that's your target journal if you haven't followed the guidelines? Just like a professor saying, this is what I want you to accomplish in the paper, and then you ignore what that professor says and does something else. The professor isn't going to be particularly happy. Neither will the journal editor. Highlight your paper's contribution. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later on, you'll be doing a cover letter. And in your paper itself, in your cover letter, you want to talk about what are your paper's contributions. And if you haven't published much, or if you've tried to publish and been rejected, one of the standard replies that editors or reviewers will have is this particular paper only makes a marginal doesn't make a sufficient contribution to the literature or to the field that's going to take place. It's only a marginal, and they're looking for something greater. So unless Professor Kotler previously talked about the marketing area, which is very important, you have to market your paper. You've got to sell your paper in the sense of why is it important, why should it take up journal space. One of the ways that you can be successful is to strive for originality. Simply taking a study that was done in the US and doing it in Sri Lanka or doing it in India or doing it in the UK, most probably is not going to lead you to those top journals. Maybe the journal that you were looking at, the paper was originally published, was a top journal. It's very unlikely that that same type of thing is simply a replication of that particular paper somewhere else that may potentially get in a C or possibly a B journal, but it needs to be original. You need to stand out. As you see in the figure here, the yellow figure, need to stand out from the crowd. Why is your paper different? What does it contribute on the previous point to the literature? Here is something that is absolutely critical. This seems obvious. Learn to write effectively. I've been the editor of over 30 books, working with hundreds of different authors on various chapters, many of which have PhDs, endowed chairs. Very few are really effective writers. If you're not a particularly effective writer, then either you need to develop that skill or get someone on your team who is effective in writing. Otherwise, the way that you may have excellent ideas, but if you are not effective in expressing those, then you're not going to be successful in getting your papers accepted. Once you write that paper, a key ingredient is to edit, edit, edit. Often an individual may find it very, very difficult to edit their own paper. They thought what they do is really wonderful. Rarely is it, even with the best writers that are going to take place. So write without fear, edit without mercy. And so editing that paper and having others review that is going to be critical. 3 more points over here. Pay attention to details. If, for example, in the writing guidelines, it says the references should follow the following format. If you don't follow that format, or for example, if you cite something in a paper that don't include it in the references, or include something in the references that you don't cite in the paper, your reviewers are going to pick that up most likely, and that's going to show a lack of attention to detail. In the vernacular, you're a sloppy researcher or a sloppy writer. And what that's liable to do is to create a negative impression that if you're sloppy doing this, were you sloppy in conducting the research? So pay attention to those details. Number 9, learn to handle rejection. I tell new PhD students that if you're in finance, and certainly it's true in marketing, accounting, and all the other major type of silo disciplines that take place in business, you're going to be rejected. Again, top journals, 95% of the people who are going to submit something are going to be rejected. If you're even in a medium grade finance journal, you're talking 15% are going to be accepted, so 85% would be rejected. You need to be able to handle that particular type of rejection. If you happen to get a revise and resubmit, because rarely anything gets accepted with the first round, you need to respond very, very carefully to your reviewers. They have made a series of points. You need to respond each of those. And the last thing I'll do is right here. When you take a look at a few tips, when you respond to your reviewers, these are some items. These are not directly from me. They're from Sophie Lewis from a paper that she had in 2016, but I think it provides excellent advice. Don't be hasty. I have a paper under review at a top accounting journal, and they've given me a year to revise and resubmit. I'll have it done much before then, but I'm not trying to turn it around in a week, because often if you revise that and that's not sufficient, you could be rejected at the next stage. Don't feel obligated to implement every suggestion. Sometimes your reviewers are wrong, and your reviewers make a suggestion that's going to be infeasible, or you've thought about it and you found that it's not going to work. They may suggest a methodology that may not be particularly appropriate. Well, you don't want to implement every suggestion, but you have to provide a rationale why you did not do that. You don't want to get bogged down over here in taking a look at individual comments. Don't get sidetracked. Take a look at what the general holistic nature of their comments happen to be. Don't say you've done something that you haven't. Good reviewers are going to look for those comments and make sure that you've responded to it. If you said you did and you haven't, you've lost credibility. Don't return a mess. In other words, you want to return something that's going to be highly and professionally polished. Don't ignore your tone. You don't want to have a negative tone that's going to talk down to your reviewers or to your editor who's provided comments. That is a very big mistake, which could lead to a rejection. Don't forget your cover letter. And in that, of course, you're going to talk about how you responded to your reviewers, a point-by-point review, not in the cover letter, but typically following the individual suggestions that have been made. And also talk about the contribution of your paper. And finally, over here, don't be afraid to walk away. In other words, you may look at the amount of things that have been suggested, and you may see that it is not going to be feasible for you to do everything. So as a consequence, it may simply be best to regroup, find another target journal, and move forward. And basically, those are my comments. I hope they have been helpful. Let me go out of this. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Professor H. Kent Baker, for sharing your valuable knowledge on improving research productivity and journal acceptances. It is with great pleasure that I invite Professor D.G. Dharmaratna, Head, Department of Accountancy and Finance, to accompany Professor Indunil Dayaratna, Chairman, Board of Study, Faculty of Graduate Studies, to symbolically award the token of appreciation to Professor H. Kent Baker for his academic contribution at the 6th ICMR 2021.
Oh, thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you.